All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. All right. So we find ourselves in Jeremiah chapter 4. If you'll recall, it's kind of my computer has decided that it wants to cause problems. Okay. Anyway, so we have been looking at the discussion of Israel's condition, or Judah's condition, to the forefront here of what is about to happen. And so this is an announcement of judgment as we begin verse 5. And it says, "Declare in Judah, proclaim in Jerusalem, and say, blow the trumpet through the land, cry aloud and say, assemble and let us go into the fortified cities." So blow the alarm bell, saying that enemies are coming. A lot of towns would either have a horn or they'd have in European history, you'd have a small village and they'd have a bell that if raiders were coming, they'd ring and they'd all run inside and muster and all of that for protection. And that's kind of the same idea here. In this case, it probably would have been a ram's horn, a shofar. Aloud and say, assemble, let us go into the fortified cities. Raise a standard toward Zion. Flee for safety. Stay not, for I bring disaster from the north. Okay, now the trick that is going on here, and this is a kind of an important element here, is that both when we talk about Assyria and the northern kingdom, and when we talk about Babylon and the southern kingdom, the way an army would have to march would have involved going north. So if you'll recall, world, there is what they call the Fertile Crescent. And between Babylon and Assyria is a large desert. And now in modern day, they actually have a highway that cuts across. But even today, the road can get lost in sandstorms. I mean, it's a rough terrain. Almost and probably worse as far as wind and sand. But if you've ever traveled from Nevada to Southern California, there's when you get on the highway, right as you get into California, there'll be a part that says no gas for 200 miles. Last gas for 180, 200 miles. And it's just desolate land. And there's no towns, there's nothing. And literally you come by a gas station that's somewhat expensive and it says last gas for however long it is. And that's kind of the idea here, is that the land is so desolate, the land is so inhospitable. There was really, at that point, Hello, sorry. No. Jeremiah chapter 4, starting in verse 5. Actually, we're about to start verse 6. Or 7. So it says, so for an army to attack Israel, or Jerusalem, they would come from one of two directions. They'd either come from the north or they'd come from the south. There is some level they could come from the west via the water, but the truth of the matter is, even then, there aren't any really good ports to stage a landing. It can be done that whenever you look at the eastern side of the Mediterranean, as far as naval ports, the massive amount of churn coming out of the Nile makes most of the southern side of the eastern Mediterranean not really a good place for landing boats. For ports. Right. Little different now. But it is definitely an issue there. And then, of course, even then, you have the Nile, and then a little bit further over, you have a small strip of land between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, which now is a major shipping channel with the Suez Canal. But at that time, that was not there. It was land. So really, what it's saying is, your enemy's not coming from Egypt; it's coming from the north, which would have been Babylon, Assyria, Persia, any of those, Greece, Rome, all of them would have come the same direction, straight out of the north. Okay. So he's bringing destruction from the north, bringing disaster from the north and great destruction. A lion has gone up from his thicket. A destroyer of nations has set out. He has gone out from his place to make your land a waste. Your cities will be ruined without inhabitants. So he's speaking of, and it's interesting to look at this, he is speaking of Babylon here. Discussion really, really does flow into this idea that Babylon is coming. Let me do this. Okay. Daniel. Sorry, I'm looking up another passage. Okay. So, the idea here is, so a lion has gone up from his thicket, destroyers set out. Hello. Jeremiah chapter 4, we're at verse 7. Okay. So this idea of a lion leaving his den and coming to attack with tremendous damage being done. Now, what I was going to bring up is later when we come to the other side of the Babylonian captivity, we see Daniel as he is dealing with the end of Babylon's reign. God gives him a vision at night. Okay, and interestingly enough, it says, this is Daniel chapter 7. You don't have to turn there, but I'm going to read it real quick. I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And four great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Okay, so once again, notice we have a lion here. Now, as we look through all of it, we see a lion, a bear, okay? We see a leopard, and then we see a dragon. Okay, that's the four beasts that we deal with. But this idea of the lion, whenever you read the rest of the discussion, each of these four beasts is a kingdom that is going to deal with Israel. And to go through them, the lion is Babylon. Okay, the bear is the Medes and the Persians. The leopard is Greece, and the dragon is Rome. Okay, so part of the way that we look at this, there are some scholars that hold that it's a different set, but the issue that we have to deal with is clearly in Jeremiah, the lion is used as an example of Babylon. Okay, so Babylon's going to come, it's going to destroy, it's going to lay your kingdom to waste. And then it says this, okay, for this put on sackcloth, lament and wail. So remember that those three verbs, the putting on of sackcloth, okay, which sackcloth is almost like a burlap. Okay, it's a very itchy, scratchy, uncomfortable clothing. The other thing that it would be is it would be the type of clothing that if you had nothing else, okay, it'd be like, you can't find any other clothes, so you go find a toe sack and
a potato sack.
A potato sack. Okay.
People used to make clothes out of those.
Oh, I know. They weren't comfortable.
Oh, but they weren't.
But here is the primary discussion. The putting on of sackcloth is a biblical and really an ancient Near East, but the Bible uses it a lot, is a symbol of mourning. Okay, kind of like what you think of today, that you'll see people, this is particularly in sports and that kind of thing, wear a black armband that for or whatever. Okay, a sign of mourning. Wearing black at a funeral is a sign of mourning, those type of things. Well, instead, what they would do is, and maybe one of the better examples of this is David. Okay, remember that after David and his sin with Bathsheba, okay, David is the king. He has fine robes of purple and all of that. And because he's in mourning over, number one, his sin, but also what God has told him is going to happen to his child, he takes off all his royal finery. He puts on sackcloth. He pours ashes on his head. That's another symbol there. They would take ashes from the fire and put it on their head. Okay. And they would lament. Okay. They would cry. They would wail. And by the way, those are both an idea here. Okay. So for this, put on sackcloth, take off your fine garments, put on sackcloth, put on the clothes of one who's mourning. Okay. Cry and literally this idea is cry and scream in your anguish. We see some interesting dynamics within this idea of wailing.
They really put on a show, huh?
There is a level of showmanship to it. When you go back and you look at the New Testament story of Lazarus, okay, and there's other places where Jesus raises the dead, but Lazarus gives the dichotomy here. At a Jewish funeral, they would actually get people to come and be professional
I was
wailers.
gonna say, didn't they have somebody that just
They would come. They would come to the funerals and yes. But the idea of wailing is loud, emotional outcries. Okay. And by the way, we don't think of that very often, but when you see maybe a good example from television is when you get into a TV show where the guy loses everything and he suddenly just screams out, and that's wail. Okay. Their emotions hit a point where they can no longer hold it in. Think of the difference between quiet weeping and under so much emotional distress, you can't be quiet anymore. We almost call it, ugly crying. And there really is a difference between crying and ugly crying.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the idea. Put on the clothes of mourning, weep and wail. By the way, back to that story of Lazarus, just so we get it, there is a group that is wailing for Lazarus. But when Jesus comes in, and the shortest verse in the Bible, John 11:35, it says Jesus wept. His weeping was quiet. It wasn't wailing. It was weeping, which is different. Okay, why are they lamenting and wailing? Why are they putting on sackcloth? Because the fierce anger of the Lord is not turned back from us. Then in verse 9, in that day declares the Lord, courage shall fail both king and official. There will be no one brave. There will be no one able to stand. The priest shall be appalled and the prophets astounded. Okay, the priests will be in shock. The prophets will be amazed at what's happening. Then I said, okay, so this is Jeremiah. Okay. Jeremiah says, then I said, Lord God, surely you have utterly deceived this people in Jerusalem, saying, it shall be well with you. whereas the sword has reached their very life. Okay, so here is the idea here. So remember, he's telling them to declare that this is going to happen, and this is years before it happens. Okay, you have been sinful, you have been all that, and so I'm bringing judgment. But the people who have refused to follow God will receive false messages. And this is something they talk about. Later in Jeremiah, you're going to see Jeremiah going against other false prophets who say, oh no, God's not going to do anything. We're okay. And so the priests shall be appalled and the prophets astounded. Why? Because they've been deceived. And so Jeremiah even goes, and he goes, but that's not what's going on. What's gone on is they have deceived themselves. Then in verse 11, at that time it will be said to this people and to Jerusalem, a hot wind from the bare heights in the desert toward the daughter of my people, not to winnow or cleanse. So now here is the idea. A wind will blow. Okay. Now, here's the thing. Okay. There is a difference between a wind that blows the dirt away. The discussion of winnow is important here because winnowing is what you do to grain.
Is that where you grind it?
No, this is how you get the individual kernels. So to winnow wheat, what you would do is you would take it and you would beat it. Okay. And then you would take a shovel or a rake or something of that manifest on a day that has an appropriate amount of wind, and you would toss the pot thick. The seeds are heavier, and so the wind won't carry them away, and they fall back down on the ground. The chaff, all the parts that. And by the way, let's make sure we understand. The chaff is the natural design of the plant to spread seed. Okay.
It's taken by the wind, right?
Think of a dandelion.
Yeah.
Okay. What is the purpose of the dandelion becoming this white thing?
So it can spread it all over.
The wind catches those little pieces and they pull them off. Well, each of those little deals has a seed. And it carries them as far as it's going to carry them. And when it hits the ground, then another dandelion grows. That's why they're so hard to get rid of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially when somebody likes blowing on them like me.
Wheat does the same thing. Okay. It doesn't blow quite as far, but wheat will do the same thing. Well, in order to get it to where it's usable as grain, you break off all the little soft pieces that are meant to carry it, and you throw them up and you let the wind carry it. And then the seed falls back down because you've broken it up. This wind is too strong for that purpose. Okay, the idea to cleanse would be that you have an outdoor pavilion, and if there's dirt on it, then a wind of the correct amount will blow the dirt off.
Too much
Will blow more dirt on.
Yeah.
So this wind is too strong, and it says it this way, not to winnow or cleanse, a wind too strong for this comes for me. Not meant to cleanse, winnow, but is instead meant to cover. Now it is I who speak in judgment upon them. Okay. The hot wind is God and his judgment. It's not useful. It's for destruction. Why? Because they have been unfaithful. What goes on? Behold, he comes up like clouds, his chariots like a whirlwind. So notice the imagery. Behold, he comes up like clouds. What that means, he comes like a storm. His chariot like a whirlwind. So now we see this picture of a tornado or a dust devil, or, I mean, we think of, yeah, his horses are swifter than eagles. Woe to us, for we are ruined. Now, here is the scary part, is part of what God is picturing is this army. He comes so fast, we don't even have time to run. It's 1 minute, everything's okay, and the next minute, he's there. And even beyond that, as he comes upon resistance, he just blows through them. Nobody provides any real resistance. Okay. So then it goes on. Woe to us for we, Jerusalem. Wash your heart from evil that you may be saved. So remember, we've talked a little bit about the heart and all of that. Wash yourselves. So the thing I think about as we look at this, wash your heart from evil that you may be saved, is think of the old Peanuts cartoons and Pigpen. Okay. So the story of Pigpen is that Pigpen is the one who's always inside a cloud.
Yeah.
Okay, he's so dirty that everywhere he goes, there's just this cloud of dust surrounding him. And every once in a while, you would get this moment where they would have a moment where Pigpen got a bath and he knows the cloud had formed. Okay. Now that's not God in this, that's the people. They have covered themselves in filth. Now, to kind of get into the biblical discussion, when we talk about this idea of covered in filth, the kind of the best way to explain it. Nope, you're all right. So when we hear in the Bible the discussion of filth, the picture that is being made is not just dirt. It's dung. I always use this example because for those of you that have worked with cattle, if you go out and spend a day branding and do any real work at that, you are going to come home covered in crap. Okay. If you're the pusher, particularly, because what do you have to do? You have to get behind the cow, grab the tail, and push them forward. And you are pressing your leg up against the back end of the cow. And guess what? Your pants are going to be covered in
crap.
Okay, that's filth. It is smelly. It is unhealthy. It's defiling. And remember that, and by the way, we get into this in Ezekiel. There's a moment in Ezekiel, it's very interesting to look at this idea. Early in Ezekiel's ministry, remember, he's in Babylon. It's after this exile. He's in Babylon. And God is having him perform what God is doing. And he tells him for a half a year, I think is it a year, a half a year, he's to lie on one side. He's to lay on the ground on his right side for like half a year to a year.
Oh.
And it says that during that time, he has to use dung to cook his meals. Okay. And originally the idea was human dung to cook his meals.
Yeah.
And he goes, but that would defile me. Can I use cow dung? And God goes, here's the funny part of that. So let's make sure we understand. In this part of the country, a lot of the campfires, that's how they were done. So once it's dried,
Oh, yeah.
So once all the moisture has come out of it, then it no longer smells. It no longer, But what is- but
Yeah.
but think about it. It's 90% grass,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's extremely dry plant material. And so it burns incredibly well.
Huh.
And it burns hot. So that was what a lot of campfires in this part of we always think of the little wood campfires and all of that. When you think of people in New Mexico and that, there's not enough trees for that. So they would do a lot of their campfires would be on dung.
Yeah.
Okay. And by the way, let's deal with what cattlemen did for fun. They would have cow pie pitching contests. They'd throw, cow dung. But this is fresh. They are covered in filth. So wash your heart. Wash the filth out of your heart that I could save you. Okay. I'm bringing destruction because you're filthy. You are wicked, you're filthy, you are disobedient, you are idolaters, you have covered yourself in the filth of all of your sin. Okay, a couple chapters earlier, you've played the prostitute. By the way, there is no hemming and hawing about the situation, because in chapter 2 and chapter 3, God basically tells Israel over and over again, you played the hooker. Those are the exact words. You had more lovers than I could count. You chased after every idol you could find. Okay. Filth, defilement. Wash yourselves that I might show some mercy. Then he goes on, how long shall your wicked thoughts lodge within you? For a voice declares from Dan and proclaims trouble from Mount Ephraim. Warn the nations that he is coming. Announce to Jerusalem. So now a voice declares from Dan. Dan is the farthest north of the 12 tribes. Okay. Mount Ephraim would have been the southernmost part of Israel. Remember at this point, well, there was a southern kingdom and a northern kingdom. Both Dan and Ephraim were part of the northern kingdom. They've been gone for 75 to 100 years at this point. God has destroyed them because of their idolatry. But a warning is coming from those that God has already wiped out, that it's coming for you now.
You screwed up.
We got it, now you're getting it.
And by the way, that is once again something that came up in chapter 3. He said 3 of talking about the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom being sisters. The northern kingdom fell so fast and was destroyed. And then it goes, but Judah, her sister, didn't learn. He saw what I did to her older sister because she played the whore. And yet she didn't turn. Oh, God won't do that to me too. So, warnings coming from up north. Hey, remember what happened to us? It's coming for you now. Warn the nations that he is coming. Renounce to Jerusalem. Besiegers come from a distant land. They shout against the cities of Judah. Like keepers of a field are they against her all around, because she has rebelled against me, declares the Lord. Why are they coming? Because they didn't commit themselves to the Lord. They rebelled. So notice the picture. Okay. This is always the picture in the Bible. God is the one true king. What happens when you incite a rebellion against a king?
Kill you.
against him.
Okay, that's the picture upon you, verse 18. Okay, so watch. It's not me being wicked, it's the fact that you were. Your ways and your deeds have brought this upon you. This is your doom, and it is bitter. It has reached your very heart. Okay, now here is the interesting discussion here, because we see this moment from God. I'm bringing judgment because of your sin. I'm bringing all this. And then in verse 19, we have, and this is something kind of important that we get the picture here. Okay. Sometimes we miss the heart of the prophet. Okay. And we think of the prophet as emotionally detached. Kind of like, you think of a doctor when he comes to bring bad news. They are trained to be emotionally detached, right? It doesn't always work, but they're typically not going to be super emotional as they give you bad news. Prophets didn't work that way. Verse 19 begins the response of Jeremiah to what God has told him to say. So I want you to imagine this. God has told, here's what I want you to tell Judah. And Jeremiah, as he hears this, then responds and puts down his own words of what he feels as he hears this. My anguish, I writhe in pain. Oh, the walls of my heart. My heart is beating wildly. I cannot keep silent, for I hear the sound of the trumpet, the alarm of war. Crash follows hard on crash. The whole land is laid waste. So notice the response of Jeremiah. Now, whenever you really look at Jeremiah, one of the things that he will often be called is the weeping prophet. And a big part of that is almost everyone never really gets to give good news. I think there are a couple of points, but I mean, it's pretty much bad news all the time. But he is looking at the people who he calls his own and watching them fall away from God and hearing God say, I've had enough. And so he is in anguish over what God is planning to do. Suddenly my tents are, how long must I see the standard and hear the sound of the trumpet? So he is seeing in vision this army come, and he's like, how long must I listen to this happen? And then, but notice, he says, for my people are foolish. They know me not. They are stupid children. They have no understanding. They are wise in doing evil, but how to do good they know not. Now, in here, but I think there's an idea of a mirror here, that Jeremiah is mirroring the heart of God at this moment. My people are foolish and they don't know me. See, Jeremiah goes, how long must I hear this? And he sees them through God's eyes. My people are foolish and they don't know me. They know how to do evil, but they don't know how to do good. They don't know how to obey. They don't understand. And I'm having to do this. See, because we really come into what kind of has to be God here at some level. It says, I looked on the earth and behold, it was out without form and void. Well, that is a statement that comes all the way back to Genesis chapter 1. There may be some hyperbole in this, that I looked on the earth and saw that the destruction made it look like it was formless. The destruction was so complete. To the heavens they had no light, but Verse 23 certainly sounds like the beginning of creation. I looked on the mountains and they were quaking, and all the hills moved to and fro. I looked and behold, there was no man, and all the birds of the field had fled. I looked and behold, the fruitful land was a desert, and all its cities were laid in ruins before the Lord, before his fierce anger. So some of this is poetic language. I looked at the earth and I saw that everything built on it was gone, and it felt dark. And the mountains were quaking, and the hills were moving, and and all the men were gone, and the birds had fled. Behold, I looked at and the fruitful land. So remember that Israel was called what? A land flowing with milk and honey. The fruitful land was a desert. So a place that was completely fruitful and could sustain every need was now a hunk of rock. All its cities were laid in ruins before the Lord, before his fierce anger. God is so angry at their sin and so angry at their disobedience that he is going to rip the land apart. And he's going to completely remove its fruitfulness. See, the scary thing is that can happen in our lives if we choose to rebel.
Sounds current.
It's current in our own lives. That we can watch what once was fertile land, what once was fertile plain, and we can see it turn into desert because we would not bow. Now, I think on the national level, it can happen too. I chuckled this morning. Michelle was listening to a comedian talking about, for those that didn't grow up in the 90s. And it was talking about, all the things that happened in the 90s that the internet, because they were and call waiting and all of that. And then it he jokes around about Y2K, and he says, that everybody was worried about Y2K, and so everybody had to stay inside and they hoarded toilet paper. And then he suddenly goes, "Oh no, I guess you do know about that." But think about those moments where in March of 2020, prosperity went away.
Everything.
For over a year. We saw businesses close because you couldn't open a restaurant. You couldn't because of social distancing and all. And think of all the businesses that shut down. We were talking about it in Amarillo on Friday. Is that these businesses, particularly like buffet type, Furs and Golden Corral and Chinese buffets were hit hard because you couldn't go in because of the rules.
COVID, yeah.
And so, but that's kind of this idea. The fruitful land became a desert. All your fruitfulness, all of the prosperity that you had went away in a moment. Like it or not, that is what COVID did. It destroyed our prosperity for the space of about a year and a half. And of course, if you really look at it, we still haven't completely recovered. So that is part of this discussion. It may not be a battle. It may not be an enemy. It may be a pestilence. It may be a
Disease.
Look at the same thing of 1929.
Spanish flu.
No, the Great Depression.
Oh.
Black Tuesday. And we saw, so that's the day the stock. So what happened is we'd had what was really kind of very similar to what you think of in the in 2008 with the housing bubble. Do you remember that whole discussion? Only on a much greater scale. There'd been all this wealth built on basically on sand. And in 1929, hundreds of millions of imaginary dollars went away.
Went away. And people jumped off the building.
And so people that had
brokers.
lost everything.
Yeah.
And so we call it the Great Depression. Well, that is a fruitful land becoming a desert.
Basically.
Maybe not literally, but that's still the idea. God can use many different ways to punish wickedness. And I'm not giving a specific reason that 1929 was judgment, but understand that there are moments in our, if you ever read many of the Christian writers around the Civil War and just after, will point that the Civil War was a judgment from God on our practice of slavery. Now that's not the only thing that was going on, and that may not be the primary reason that the war started, but things that don't look like they were God moving can still be God punishing. And so we have to understand that in this case, it's this place that was so fruitful and was a great place to be suddenly became uninhabitable. 7, it says, "For thus says the Lord." Remember once again that "for thus says the Lord" is the primary quote of a prophet. That's the primary purpose of the prophet, is to speak for the Lord. And it says this: "The whole land shall be a desolation, yet I will not make a full end." So notice the picture here, okay? The desolation will be total, but it will not be the end.
It won't be complete.
Right. It will not. There really is this idea: the whole land shall be a desolation. The desolation shall be total, but it will not be permanent. "For this the earth shall mourn, and the heavens above be dark. For I have spoken, I have purposed, I have not relented, nor will I turn back." This is certain. "At the noise of horseman and archer, every city takes to flight. They enter thickets, they climb among rocks. All the cities are forsaken." Okay. At the noise of the armies coming, every city takes to flight. "And you, O desolate one, what do you mean that you dress in scarlet, that you adorn yourself with ornaments of gold, that you enlarge your eyes with paint?" So here's the picture. "Oh, and you, Judah, who is actually beginning to live in desolation, who are you to pretend it's not coming?" So, "Oh no, I still wear scarlet," which was rich clothing. You wear gold, and that you you enlarge your eyes. So think about, the makeup idea. You wear makeup and perfume, and you wear rich clothes, and you wear earrings and jewelry and all this sort of stuff. You're beautifying yourself in vain. And then we come back. Your lovers despise you. So we come back to this idea. The ones that you have, and let's use the term, the people that you hoard yourself out to, they despise you now. They seek your life. "For I heard a cry as of a woman in labor, anguish as one giving birth to her first child." So I've never experienced that, but I've heard stories. I know he's out of favor now, but I still remember the old Bill Cosby comedy where he says, that childbearing pain, pulling it over your head. And I don't know if that's true, but I'm willing to take their word for it. But notice the idea. I heard a cry as of a woman in childbirth. Incredible pain. Anguish as one giving birth to her first child. The cry of the daughter of Zion, gasping for breath, stretching out her hands. Woe is for murders. I'm losing consciousness in front of those who want to kill me. I'm dying. So notice the very vivid and very serious look into this idea of how total this judgment is. There's no hope. There's no escape. It's coming and you can't get away. Pain, despair, agony. Important to understand that we come back up here a few verses back to verse 22. Why is all this happening? For my people are foolish and they know me not. All the way back in Exodus and Leviticus and Deuteronomy. In fact, there's a major element of it in Deuteronomy. It says, hey guys, here's what happens. If you will obey my commandments, if you will follow me, all of these blessings will come. You will be amazed at how great your life can be. If you disobey me, you are going to be amazed at how bad it can get. Okay? As they finalized the covenant that they made with God, the contract that they made with God, God said, if you obey, good things will happen. If you disobey, this comes. You didn't obey. I am merely fulfilling what I told you would happen. It's bad. Now, I will tell you, it's important that we understand this. The biblical term of covenant is like a contract, only far, far more binding. Okay. God warned them. In fact, you can go back and you can look all the way back in Judges and you can begin to see the warnings. Hey, turn back. Don't turn away from me or else it's going to get bad. Hey, keep doing, don't do what I told you not to. Hey, wake up. Disobeyed and disobeyed and disobeyed and disobeyed until finally God goes, okay.
Do you think one reason that, their idolatry caused them to put their babies through the fire
Yes.
was one of the reasons?
That is definitely a major discussion. And let's make sure we understand. Okay. When you look through biblical history, the killing of children always results in profound judgment. Okay. Remember, we're talking about Egypt. That kind of the last straw before Moses is what? They started throwing the Jewish babies in the Nile.
Yeah.
And killing babies. Okay. We look at, that was one of the primary practices of led to God going, I'm done with you. And I'm gonna send my people in and they're gonna wipe you out. Why? They would send their kids through the fire. That's the term that's used in the Bible. Let's make sure we understand. And I know it's grotesque and horrible. They tell stories that they would have a statue of Molech, one of the gods. He was a god of destruction. And he would be standing like this. It was a bronze statue and it stood like this. And by his feet, they had a pit to build a fire. And they would light him. And then his hands would begin to glow red hot. And they would lay their living children in his hands.
Oh my. Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
and that's how they would sacrifice their children to Molech. Okay. Now I'm gonna be absolutely blatant to say this. I will get you the proof if you'd like, but there are comments in this. There are people within the abortion discussion that will call abortion a sacrifice to the pagan gods. Now, what is it really? It's a sacrifice to the god of pleasure, the god of convenience. They may not be the words we say, but it is the same thing.
Yeah.
It is sacrificing
Yes.
your child for your, because by the way, here's the picture.
Want the house.
Why did you sacrifice your child to Molech? So that he would give you prosperity.
That's terrible.
If I give you my kid, then you'll do good things for me.
Wow.
There is a connect and what we think of in the abortion discussion today. And no matter how you want to cloak it, it is still the death of an innocent person in the name of convenience. Now I'm going to be fair. There is a difference between, and this is always one of those things that gets exploded in our culture today. If the mother's life is in jeopardy,
Yeah.
then that is a different thing. Okay. If you have a situation where the mother and baby's life are both in jeopardy, then it is not by the definition that we would often use an abortion to a clinic.
Yeah.
It is a medical procedure to save the mother's life.
Yeah.
Okay. That is a different thing. Okay. So let's just be completely fair. There's a thing called a tubal pregnancy.
Yeah.
Okay. If you have a tubal pregnancy, guess what the doctor's going to do first thing? We got to take the baby.
Yeah.
Because the mother and baby will almost certainly die. The
Yeah.
chances are
Because
incredibly
it'll grow
high.
and it'll rupture that.
It'll rupture the fallopian tube and
You'll bleed
the-
out
the-
internally
yeah,
before
you'll
you
bleed to
know.
death. That is not the same thing.
No, not at all.
There is a discussion within all of that that is often used. There's a story in the Bible about a test for a woman who'd been her drink something, and then if she'd been unfaithful, then the baby would miscarry, and you would know that she'd been unfaithful. And they go, "Oh, see, there's abortion." No, this was a test to see of her faithfulness, and it was God's decision what happened to the baby,
Mhm.
not I'm going to kill the baby.
Yeah.
And there is a difference, and it's not popular to discuss that way, but it is important to understand that yes, at some level, that practice is a major part of God's judgment upon them, is that they were sacrificing their children to pagan gods. And by the way, the only time we ever see anything even approaching that in God's terminology is the discussion of Abraham. Okay. Remember that Abraham says, "I want you to go and sacrifice your kid."
Mhm.
Okay.
Gets
By the
all
way,
about the
let's
mom.
also make sure we understand Isaac was like 14 years old.
Yeah, like.
He was not a baby. He was like 14 years old.
She liked it when she was little.
But what does God do? As soon as he finds that Abraham is willing to give everything to him, he provides a replacement. When we get into the discussion of Moses and the law of Moses, remember that God spares all the firstborn. He says, every firstborn belongs to me.
Yeah.
And what he says is you have to redeem every firstborn. They're mine, but you don't sacrifice them to me. You redeem them with another sacrifice. There is never a point in anywhere in the Bible where God demands the sacrifice of children. It was a pagan thing, and it was an abomination before the Lord, and it always led to judgment. Always. We're going to stop right there. We will pick up on chapter 5 next time.